The art of invisibility is severely underrated in the corporate jungle. 25 years at Eastern Atlantic Insurance taught me that the quieter you become, the more you hear. And oh, the things I've heard while blending into the beige walls of the Philadelphia headquarters. Whispers about mergers that never materialized, office affairs conducted in supply closets, and the precise mathematical formula for stealing someone else's lunch from the communal refrigerator without getting caught. My name is Richard Hale, and at 59, I've become what people around here call the living archive. Not the most glamorous nickname, but in a world where institutional memory has the lifespan of a fruit fly, being the guy who remembers why we abandoned the Henderson Protocol in OR7 has its advantages. Or so I thought. The Philadelphia skyline has been my constant companion through the east-facing windows of my corner office. Not the corner office they give to executives with actual power, but the one tucked away where visitors never venture. The kind they award to loyal workhorses who've survived enough corporate restructurings to earn a view. I've watched the city change through that window, watched buildings rise and fall, while I remained constant as the Delaware River. My wife Elaine used to joke that I was married to my desk. The day you retire, Richard, I expect to find indents in your palms, shaped exactly like your keyboard. 27 years of marriage, and she still had the capacity to make me laugh, even as the invisible fissures between us widened. I suppose that's what makes betrayal so devastating. It comes wrapped in the familiar, camouflaged by routine. Matt Donovan joined Eastern Atlantic 6 years ago, fresh out of Wharton, with a smile that earned immediate trust and ambition that practically steamed off him like heat from summer asphalt. I recognized something in him, a younger, less cautious version of myself perhaps. When Curtis from HR brought him to my office that first day, I remember thinking, this one might actually be worth mentoring. Richard, Matt's going to be shadowing you on the Westbrook portfolio analysis. Show him how we do things the Eastern Atlantic way. The Eastern Atlantic way. A phrase I'd heard so many times it had lost all meaning, like a word repeated, until it dissolves into nonsensical sounds. But I nodded and gestured to the chair across from mine. Welcome aboard, Matt. First rule, the coffee on the 3rd floor is undrinkable. 4th floor has the good stuff. He laughed, and that's how it began, with coffee preferences and spreadsheet tutorials. I taught him everything. How to read between the lines of quarterly reports, how to predict market volatility patterns specific to our industry, how to navigate the labyrinthine politics of our executive floor. I even shared my personal analysis, templates refined over decades of trial and error. You're a walking encyclopedia, Rich, he'd say, leaning back in his chair, that Wharton confidence never quite leaving him despite the occasional humbling experience. Half the stuff you know isn't even documented anywhere. That's job security, I joke, not realizing I was handing him the blueprint to my obsolescence. Matt became a regular fixture at our home. Sunday barbecues, holiday gatherings. Elaine insisted on including him. He's all alone in the city, Richard, no family nearby. Her maternal instincts extended to every stray, human or otherwise. That's one of the things I loved about her. I didn't notice when the glances between them lingered too long, didn't register the inside jokes that emerged between my wife and my protege, didn't catalog the way Elaine started wearing her hair down more often, the way she used to when we first met. The living archive missed the most obvious data points of all. The realization didn't come as a dramatic revelation, no lipstick on, collars or incriminating text messages accidentally seen. Instead, it accumulated like sediment, layer by imperceptible layer, until one Tuesday afternoon the weight of evidence was simply too substantial to ignore. It was Elaine's phone left on the kitchen counter while she showered. A message preview from Matt. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. R will be at the quarterly planning meeting all day. Just 13 words that collapsed 27 years of marriage. And 6 years of mentorship into a singularity of betrayal. The truly pathetic part? My first thought wasn't anger at the affair. It was a nagging confusion about how Matt knew my schedule when the quarterly planning meeting had only been added that morning. Well done, Richard. Always the analyst, even when your life is imploding. Replaced the phone exactly as I'd found it, and poured myself a scotch I didn't drink. When Elaine came downstairs, hair damp and smelling of lavender, I asked about her plans for the week, as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just discovered that the foundation of my personal life was built on quicksand. But suspicion is a cancer that spreads rapidly once detected. That night I couldn't sleep, watching the digital clock tick from 1:17 to a.m., 3:42 a.m., while Elaine breathed evenly beside me. The bed felt suddenly vast, a continent separating us rather than inches. I replayed conversations, analyzed casual mentions of Matt over dinner, recategorized Elaine's recent yoga classes and book club meetings in the harsh light of new understanding. The analyst in me needed verification. The husband in me dreaded it. The next day I did something I'd never imagined myself capable of. I called in sick only the third time in my career and followed my wife. The immediate shame of this action settled over me like a film of grime. I couldn't wash away, yet I did it anyway, becoming a stranger to myself as I trailed her silver Volvo across Philadelphia, maintaining a careful distance, hiding behind sunglasses that did nothing to disguise the hollow feeling spreading through. My chest, Elaine drove to Center City, parking in the public garage on 15th Street. I found a spot 3 levels up and followed on foot, a ghostly presence trailing my own wife through the busy midday streets. She walked with purpose, checking her reflection in store windows, adjusting her hair with movements I once found endearing, but now seemed performative, intended for someone else's appreciation. When she entered the Warwick Hotel, something within me hoped for innocence, perhaps a legitimate lunch with friends, a surprise party for an upcoming birthday I'd somehow forgotten. I waited 10 excruciating minutes in the hotel bar, nursing a club soda I couldn't taste, before following a hunch and taking the elevator to the 7th floor. Room 712. I didn't need to check every door. I knew because Matt had mentioned staying there during a recent plumbing emergency at his condo, a detail I'd filed away without significance until this moment. The universe has a perverse way of ensuring you have all the puzzle pieces long before you realize what picture they form. I stood before the door, paralyzed by the finality of what would happen next. Knowledge once obtained cannot be unlearned. Marriages don't survive this moment. Not really, not completely. Even if the door opened to reveal an innocent explanation, the mere fact that I stood there, suspecting, investigating, would leave a permanent fracture in our relationship. But I was already broken. I needed to see I didn't knock. The electronic key card I held wasn't mine. It was the universal staff override I'd been given years ago during an insurance investigation at this very hotel, when Eastern Atlantic was evaluating a liability claim. Another insignificant detail preserved in the living archive that suddenly found deadly purpose. The light flashed green. I turned the handle. The room was dim, afternoon sun blocked by heavy curtains drawn across floor-to-ceiling windows. For a suspended moment I saw nothing but shadows and vague shapes. Then my eyes adjusted, and the scene before me seared itself permanently into my memory. Elaine was astride Matt on the bed, her back to the door, her body moving with the familiar rhythm I'd known for 27 years. His hands gripped her hips, fingers pressing into flesh I'd once believed belonged in some way to me alone. They hadn't heard the door. The television murmured in the background, some financial news program Matt probably insisted on having as ambient noise. I should have left immediately, should have quietly closed the door and disappeared with whatever shreds of dignity remained to me. Instead, I stood frozen, a voyeur to my own destruction, watching as Matt opened his eyes and saw me standing there, The shock on his face would have been comical in any other context, eyes widening, mouth forming a perfect O of horror. His hands fell away from Elaine's body, as if burned. "Rich?" he gasped. Elaine turned, the motion seeming to unfold. In cruel, slow motion, her expression transformed from pleasure to confusion to devastating comprehension in the span of a single heartbeat. "Richard!" She scrambled for the sheet, a belated modesty that struck me as absurdly pointless. "Oh, God, Richard, this isn't—" "Isn't what, Elaine?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, unnaturally calm. "Isn't exactly what it appears to be?" Matt was frantically reaching for his scattered clothes, face flushed with something between fear and shame. "Richard, I can explain—" "I'm sure you can, Matt. You've always been excellent at creating convincing narratives. It's why I recommended you for the Danforth analysis." I was speaking as if we were discussing a business matter, my tone measured and professional, while my insides twisted into shapes I couldn't name. "Though I admit, I didn't realize your talents extended to fucking my wife while angling for my job. Quite the multitasker." Elaine had wrapped herself in the sheet now, her naked vulnerability replaced by a defensive anger. "You weren't supposed to be here," she said, as if that were the true transgression. Evidently not. I gestured to the room, the rumpled bed, their discarded clothes. "You've clearly gone to considerable effort to ensure that." "Richard," Matt began again, having pulled on his pants but still bare-chested, "this isn't about your job." Of course it is. I felt oddly detached, clinical, as if observing a particularly interesting case study in human betrayal. "Everything is connected, Matt. I taught you that, remember? When analyzing risk portfolios, look for the patterns, the relationships between seemingly disparate events. You're sleeping with my wife, you're positioned to take my role, and somehow Diane from HR is involved. The variables correlate too perfectly to be coincidental." His stunned expression confirmed my suspicion about Diane. Another data point verified. "How long?" I asked, directing the question to both of them, and neither. "Richard, please," Elaine's voice cracked. "Let's not do this here. Let's go home and talk." "How long?" Each word precisely enunciated, carved from ice. Matt looked at Elaine. A silent communication between conspirators deciding how much truth to parcel out. 8 months, he finally admitted. 8 months, 243 days of lies over dinner tables and conference rooms. 8 months during which I'd invited him into our home, shared family holidays, continued to teach him everything I knew professionally. "I see." I nodded as if they'd just provided an interesting market forecast. "Well, don't let me interrupt further. You seem to have everything well in hand." I turned to leave, my movements mechanical, disconnected from the screaming void that had opened within me. "Richard, wait!" Elaine called after me, her voice thick with tears that seemed offensively self-pitying. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I paused at the door, not turning back. "No, I imagine your preferred scenario involved me never discovering the truth at all. Unfortunately for all of us, I'm rather good at pattern recognition." The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded unnervingly like the period at the end of a final sentence. I walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and proceeded through the revolving doors into the bright afternoon sunlight that felt obscene in its cheerfulness. Only in my car, sealed in its quiet privacy, did I finally allow myself to shatter, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel as silent, racking sobs convulsed through my body. I stayed there until the security guard tapped on my window, concerned by the middle-aged man who'd been sitting motionless for over an hour. I drove home, packed an overnight bag, and checked into a different hotel. That night I stared at the ceiling until dawn broke, mentally calculating the precise velocity at which my life had disintegrated, and contemplating for the first time the cold mathematics of revenge. Oh, nothing special. Lunch with Catherine tomorrow, maybe some shopping. The lie slid off her tongue with practiced ease. I wondered how many other falsehoods I'd swallowed over the years, nodding along, trusting implicitly because that's what marriage meant to me. "Sounds nice," I replied, the banality of our exchange a perverse counterpoint to the chaos inside my head. The next 2 weeks unfolded like a particularly vicious case study in corporate backstabbing. First came the confidential email from Diane Murray, our newly appointed HR director, about organizational realignment. Then the closed-door meetings where I wasn't invited. Finally, the summons to Diane's office where she explained with practiced sympathy that my position was being eliminated. Eastern Atlantic is evolving, Richard. We need to streamline our operations for the digital era. Streamlining, it seemed, meant replacing a 59-year-old analyst with his 34-year-old protege. The severance package was generous. By corporate standards, 6-month salary and healthcare continuation. A golden handshake for nearly 3 decades of loyal service. Diane's carefully neutral expression never wavered as she outlined the transition plan. "Matt Donovan will be taking over your accounts. We'd like you to spend the next 2 weeks bringing him up to speed on any outstanding projects." "Matt," I repeated, tasting the name like something bitter. "Interesting choice." A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. "He's been exceptional since joining us. The board feels he brings fresh perspectives to our analytics approach." Fresh perspectives. Another corporate euphemism for younger and cheaper, although in Matt's case I suspected his salary would exceed mine. Youth may have been his advantage, but I doubted they were saving money on this particular shuffle. "Of course," I replied, with a pleasantness that seemed to unnerve her more than anger would have. "I'll ensure a smooth transition." As I left her office, I caught sight of Matt waiting near the elevator bank, his expression a careful mask of professional concern. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, suddenly fascinated by something on his phone. Coward, I thought, at least own your betrayal. I hadn't returned to the Warwick Hotel after that day, choosing instead to maintain the grotesque charade of normalcy at home. Elaine had called repeatedly that afternoon, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that evolved. From apologies to accusations. How dare I disappear? How could I be so cold? Why wasn't I willing to talk things through like adults? By evening, she'd settled on a story. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness, not representative of her feelings for me. She loved me, had always loved me. I returned home after midnight to find her waiting in the living room, eyes red-rimmed, but her expression carefully composed. We engaged in a surreal conversation where neither of us directly mentioned what I'd witnessed. She spoke of complications and confusion, while I nodded as if contemplating an abstract philosophical dilemma rather than the ruins of my marriage. "We can work through this," she insisted, reaching for my hand across the kitchen table. "People make mistakes, Richard. Marriages survive worse." I didn't pull away from her touch, but I felt nothing beneath her fingers, as if the nerve endings in my skin had simply shut down, a defensive measure against further pain. "Of course," I replied, the agreeable corporate veteran who always found reasonable solutions to difficult problems. "We should both get some sleep. Things will seem clearer in the morning." That night, she slept beside me in our bed, maintaining a careful distance that seemed both intentional and unbridgeable. In the darkness, I imagined I could smell him on her skin, a phantom scent that followed me into uneasy dreams, where I was perpetually searching for something vital I'd misplaced. The next morning, we performed the rituals of a normal couple. Coffee poured, breakfast prepared, brief discussions of weather and schedules. I kissed her cheek before leaving, the gesture as hollow as knocking on a door opens to an empty room. At work, Matt avoided me with impressive dedication, engineering his schedule to minimize our interactions. When forced into the same meetings, he projected earnest professionalism with an undercurrent of concern, the perfect performance of someone who had nothing to hide, but was worried about a valued mentor's impending departure. But the real revelation came that evening when I overheard Elaine on the phone in our bedroom, door not quite closed, It's happening exactly like Diane said it would." Yes, he took it calmly, too calmly. "No, I don't think he suspects anything. 2 more weeks, and then we can stop sneaking around." So there it was. Not just an affair, but a conspiracy. My wife, my protege, and our ambitious HR director orchestrating my professional execution with the precision of a well-planned murder. That night, I lay awake beside Elaine, studying the familiar profile I thought I'd known completely. In repose, her face appeared innocent, unburdened by the elaborate architecture of deception she'd constructed. I wondered what dreams visited her, triumphant ones where she and Matt celebrated their victory, or perhaps anxious scenarios where their carefully laid plans unraveled. Did guilt ever intrude? Did 27 years of shared history ever give her pause? In the dim glow of the digital alarm clock, I experienced a curious detachment, as if observing myself from a distance, a man watching his life being systematically dismantled while maintaining a facade of obliviousness. The passivity of my response should have troubled me, yet it felt strangely appropriate. Let them believe their plan was working perfectly. Let them grow confident, careless. Behind my calm exterior, something else was taking shape, a coldness I hadn't known I possessed, crystallizing around a core of betrayal. If they wanted to rewrite our history, I would ensure the final chapter contained surprises they hadn't anticipated. The thing about being underestimated is that it provides a certain freedom. When people believe they know exactly what you'll do, in my case, quietly accept defeat and shuffle off to a premature retirement, they stop watching for potential threats. And when you've spent decades analyzing risk, you develop an instinct for when to strike. I went to work the next day, as if my world hadn't been shattered, smiling at colleagues who averted their eyes, already treating me like corporate dead man walking. I began the handover process with Matt, who performed a masterful impression of a man reluctantly accepting a promotion that had unexpectedly fallen into his lap. At night, I returned to a house that no longer felt like home, to a marriage that existed only as performance art. Elaine maintained her role with admirable commitment, preparing meals we'd always enjoyed, asking about my day with practiced concern, even initiating physical affection that I accepted with mechanical reciprocation. 3 nights after discovering their conspiracy, she escalated her performance. I returned from work to find her in the kitchen, preparing my favorite meal, a bottle of our special occasion wine already breathing on the counter. She'd dressed carefully, the blue wrap dress I'd always admired, hairstyled the way she wore it when we first met. The dining room table gleamed with our best china, candles creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. I thought we deserved something. "Nice," she explained, her smile tentative, eyes seeking approval I no longer had the capacity to give. I played along, showering and changing into clothes she'd laid out for me, joining her at the table to consume food that might as well have been cardboard, for all I could taste it. "Remember our trip to Napa?" she asked, refilling my wine glass. "That little vineyard where the owner kept pouring samples until we could barely stand?" I nodded, smiling at the appropriate memory. "You insisted we ship home a case of their Cabernet, even though the shipping cost more than the wine. And you calculated exactly how much each bottle ended up costing, down to the penny." Her laughter seemed genuine, her eyes softening with what appeared to be real affection. Always the analyst. For a moment the facade cracked, and I glimpsed what might have been sincere regret in her expression. But then I remembered her in that hotel room with Matt, and the momentary warmth froze over again. After dinner, she led me upstairs, her intentions transparent. This, too, was part of the script. Reconciliation through physical intimacy, the reestablishment of connections severed by betrayal. A tried-and-true strategy, doubtless discussed with Matt in one of their planning sessions. He responds to physical affection. Use that. In our bedroom, the room where I'd discovered her conspiratorial phone call just days earlier, she turned to me, reaching for the buttons of my shirt with familiar ease. "I've missed you," she whispered, her breath warm against my neck. "Even when you're right here, I've missed you." Her hands moved with practiced confidence, undressing me with the intimate knowledge acquired through decades of marriage. I allowed it, responding to her touches automatically, my body operating independently from the hollowness spreading through my chest. She guided me to our bed, where she had likely lain thinking of him, planning their future together while sleeping beside me. The wrongness of it all created a strange doubling effect, as if I were simultaneously present and absent, participating and observing from a distance. Her nightgown slipped away, revealing the body I had once known better than my own. She was beautiful still, time having shaped rather than diminished her. In another reality, I might have felt desire, love, connection. Instead, I experienced only a detached curiosity about my own capacity for performance under these circumstances. "Touch me," she urged, guiding my hands to familiar territories, arching into contact that should have felt intimate, but instead seemed performative, calculated. Her sighs, her movements, all of it choreographed for effect rather than genuine response. I complied, going through motions I'd performed countless times before, my technical competence unaffected by the emotional void within. She mistook my mechanical precision for passion, responding with increasing enthusiasm, perhaps believing her plan was working. "I love you," she gasped as I moved above her, the words falling between us like stones into still water, creating momentary ripples that quickly disappeared, leaving no trace of impact. I said nothing, focusing instead on the disassociation that allowed me to complete this final act in our marital charade. When it was over, she curled against me, her head on my chest in the position we'd maintained for 27 years, her fingers tracing patterns on my skin. "We're going to be okay," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "I know we are." I stared at the ceiling, calculating angles and trajectories, mapping the precise coordinates of my planned counterattack, while she slept trustingly beside me. In that moment, I understood something fundamental about betrayal. It doesn't just destroy what exists between people. It transforms the betrayed from within, creating shadows where light once lived. By morning, Elaine seemed genuinely hopeful, kissing me with renewed confidence before I left for work. Perhaps she'd report to Matt that their strategy was succeeding, that I remained oblivious and manageable. The predictable, reliable Richard who would never see their betrayal coming, much less respond to it with matching calculation, the perfect corporate victim, accepting his fate with resigned dignity. "I want you to know I had no idea this was coming, Rich," he said, unable to meet my gaze directly. "Of course not," I replied, mildly. These decisions happen at levels above our pay grade. The relief on his face was almost comical. He'd expected accusations, perhaps a scene. Instead, he got the same steady, methodical Richard Hale who'd trained him, now seemingly resigned to his fate. For the next week, I played my part perfectly, the aging employee graciously transferring knowledge to his replacement. But while Matt focused on inheriting my title, I was paying close attention to something far more valuable, his work on the Danforth merger, a $300 million acquisition that would be his first major project after my departure. Matt had been the lead analyst on the preliminary assessment, with me reviewing his work as a formality. But now, with my impending exit accelerated, he'd been rushing to finalize the report before my last day. Rushing, and as it turned out, making a critical miscalculation in the risk assessment model. I discovered it on a Tuesday afternoon while reviewing his spreadsheets, a classic error in the collateral valuation algorithm that significantly underestimated potential exposure. The kind of mistake that could cost Eastern Atlantic millions if the Danforth assets didn't perform as projected, which, according to my analysis, they wouldn't. As I stared at the numbers on my screen, a strange sensation crept over me, a tingling at the base of my skull, spreading downward along my spine like ice water. The error was so fundamental, so obvious to someone with my experience, that its presence felt almost deliberate. Yet I knew better. This wasn't sabotage, it was simple carelessness, born of ambition and hubris. Matt was smart, but he'd been focused on securing my position, on betting my wife, on crafting his narrative. Of corporate ascendance, he'd taken shortcuts. He'd trusted automated validation systems rather than applying the human scrutiny that decades of experience had taught me was irreplaceable. For a long moment I sat perfectly still, the office sounds around me fading to a distant hum as the implications crystallized in my mind. Here, embedded in cells, C247 through F389 of an unremarkable spreadsheet, lay the perfect instrument of justice, elegant in its simplicity, devastating in its potential impact. The old Richard Hale, loyal company man, dedicated mentor, would have immediately flagged this discrepancy, walking Matt through the correction process with patient guidance. The new Richard Hale, betrayed husband, discarded employee, simply closed the file without comment. That night, alone in my home office while Elaine watched television downstairs, I created a comprehensive analysis documenting the error and its potential consequences. I worked with methodical precision, my fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced fluidity, the familiar rhythm of data analysis providing an almost meditative calm. The work absorbed me completely, hours dissolving as I built my case. I included historical data supporting my concerns about Danforth's asset quality and projection models showing the likely financial impact. I calculated probability distributions demonstrating the high likelihood of significant losses, estimated the impact on quarterly earnings, projected the resulting stock price decline. 3 decades of expertise distilled into 27 damning pages. As I worked, the house grew quiet. Elaine came upstairs, pausing outside my office door. "Coming to bed soon?" she asked, her voice carrying that carefully calibrated blend of casualness and intimacy she'd perfected since our encounter in the hotel. "Just finishing something," I replied, without looking up. "Don't wait for me." She lingered a moment longer, perhaps sensing something in my tone or posture that triggered warning bells. But then she moved away, the soft padding of her footsteps receding down the hallway. Around 2 a.m. I completed my analysis, saving multiple copies to various secure locations. The document looked exactly like the countless other reports I'd produced throughout my career. Professional, objective, thorough. Only I knew it was actually something else entirely. A time bomb. Precision crafted and perfectly concealed. As I finally prepared for bed, a strange calm settled over me. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and paused, studying the face that looked back at me. I appeared unchanged, the same gray-flecked hair, the same lines around my eyes, the same unremarkable features that had aged gradually into late-middle anonymity. Yet something fundamental had shifted beneath that familiar exterior, a tectonic realignment of my inner landscape. The man who had entered room 712 at the Warwick Hotel no longer existed. In his place stood someone new, someone capable of calculating not just financial risks, but human vulnerabilities. Someone who understood that systems, whether corporate or marital, could be manipulated by those who knew their weaknesses. Slid into bed beside my sleeping wife, maintaining the careful distance that had become our new normal. In the darkness, I listened to her breathing, wondering if she dreamed of Matt, of their future together after my convenient removal. Did they laugh about me in private? Did they marvel at how easily I'd been manipulated, how predictably I'd responded to their machinations? The predictable Richard Hale. The reliable Richard Hale. The man who always does exactly what's expected. I smiled in the darkness, a private expression no one would see. They had no idea what was coming. I called it Supplementary Risk Assessment, Danforth Acquisition, and saved it with Eastern Atlantic's standard report template, complete with confidentiality headers, and my electronic signature. A legitimate-looking document that was never supposed to exist. The final board presentation for the Danforth merger was scheduled for my last day at Eastern Atlantic, a fitting symmetry that wasn't lost on me. I spent my remaining time meticulously organizing files, documenting processes, and behaving exactly as expected. The perfect corporate citizen, even in exile. Matt grew increasingly confident as my departure approached, his facade of reluctance giving way to barely concealed triumph. Diane from HR checked in periodically, her sympathetic smile never reaching her eyes. And each night I returned home to Elaine's elaborate performance of normalcy, a charade I maintained with Oscar-worthy commitment. On my final morning, I arrived early, before the usual crowd. The security guard nodded sympathetically. News travels fast, especially bad news. I cleaned out my desk, placing 25 years of personal effects into a single cardboard box. Family photos, industry awards, the fountain pen Elaine had given me on our 20th anniversary, now artifacts from a life that no longer existed. At 9:00 a.m., I sent 2 emails. The first went to the board of directors and included my supplementary risk assessment as an attachment, along with a brief note expressing my concerns about the Danforth valuation. The second went to Jeffrey Collins at the Philadelphia Business Journal, a reporter who'd covered Eastern Atlantic for years. His email included the same attachment and a simple message. You might find this interesting. Sources inside Eastern Atlantic Insurance have raised serious concerns about today's Danforth merger. By 9:30, I had surrendered my key card to security and was walking through the lobby for the last time, cardboard box in hand. My phone remained silent. They wouldn't have seen the emails yet. The board meeting wasn't until 11's cheer, and executives rarely checked messages before their morning briefings. I walked 6 blocks to Rittenhouse Square and found an empty bench overlooking the park. The late September air carried the first hint of autumn, and I found myself thinking about how this would be the first fall in decades where my view wouldn't be framed by an office window. At 11:23, my phone buzzed with a news alert from the Philadelphia Business Journal. Eastern Atlantic delays Danforth merger amid valuation concerns. By noon, LinkedIn notifications began appearing, colleagues suddenly remembering my existence, curious about the rumors swirling through the office. I ignored them all. At 2:17, Elaine called. I let it go to voicemail. At 3:42, Matt called. Then, again at 3:46 and 3:51. I imagined his increasing panic as the board dissected his flawed analysis, as the questions turned from professional to personal. How could you miss something so fundamental? Who reviewed this work? Why wasn't this caught earlier? By 5:00 p.m., as I sat nursing a whiskey at a bar I'd never visited before, the story had evolved. Eastern Atlantic shares drop 8% as Danforth merger collapses. Internal controls questioned. I smiled into my drink, feeling neither triumph nor remorse, just a strange, hollow satisfaction. The game wasn't over. There would be investigations, questions about why I hadn't flagged the issue earlier, possible repercussions. But I'd played my hand perfectly. The report was technically accurate, the error real, the concerns legitimate. I'd simply chosen when and how to reveal the information. As the evening progressed, more details emerged through industry channels. Matt had been placed on administrative leave pending review. Diane from HR was suddenly taking personal time. The board had ordered a comprehensive audit of all recent analytics work. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Whatever your game is, Hale, it won't work. You've just guaranteed nobody will hire you again, Diane, threatening from the sidelines. I almost admired her tenacity. I typed a response, then deleted it, then typed again. I'm not looking for another job, Diane. I'm starting a new business. You've given me quite the compelling origin story. 3 months later, I sat in a small office in Center City, Philadelphia, across from Marjorie Winters, a 64-year-old accounting manager who'd been restructured out of her position at Consolidated Financial just 11 months before her pension would have fully vested. They said my position was redundant, she explained, hands tightly clasped in her lap. But they hired someone new the following week. Younger, of course. I nodded, taking notes. And you've documented the timeline? Everything, she confirmed, sliding a folder across my desk. But their HR department insists it was a legitimate business decision. My lawyer says it's hard to prove age discrimination. It always is, I agreed. That's why most companies get away with it. But they usually leave traces of their real intentions. We just need to find them. The sign on my door read, Hale Consulting, Corporate Accountability Specialists. In the 3 months since my departure from Eastern Atlantic, I'd established a niche practice helping older employees navigate the treacherous waters of corporate restructuring. Part consultant, part investigator, part advocate, leveraging my analytical skills and insider knowledge to level playing fields that had been deliberately tilted. Eastern Atlantic had settled with me quietly after my report exposed not just Matt's error, but a pattern of risk assessment manipulations designed to inflate projected profits. No admission of wrongdoing, of course, just a significantly enhanced severance package and mutual non-disparagement clauses. Matt had resigned rather than face termination, though his professional reputation was in tatters. Last I heard, he'd relocated to Chicago, ironically the city I'd originally come from decades ago. Diane had survived the fallout but been laterally moved to a less influential position, the corporate equivalent of being sent to Siberia. And Elaine? That story concluded with predictable messiness, denial, then anger, then desperate attempts to reconcile when she realized Matt had been using her as much as he'd used me. I filed for divorce the same week I registered my consulting business. Some bridges once burned should remain ash. So what happens now? Marjorie asked, pulling me back to the present. I closed her folder and smiled. Now we examine their patterns. Companies that push out older workers usually don't do it just once. They leave fingerprints, evidence of systemic behavior. And once we find that evidence, we have leverage, she finished, a spark of hope in her eyes. Exactly. I glanced at the Philadelphia skyline through my new office window, a more modest view than my old one, but somehow more satisfying. The game is rigged, Marjorie, but even rigged games have rules. And if there's one thing I've learned in 30 years of corporate life, it's that rules can be weaponized by those who understand them best. As she left, I turned to my computer and began analyzing Consolidated Financial's public filings, searching for patterns in their workforce data, hunting for the telltale signs of systematic age discrimination. The work was detailed, meticulous, exactly the kind of analysis I'd performed for decades, now repurposed for a different cause. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Eastern Atlantic Insurance announces restructuring after failed Danforth merger. CEO steps down. I allowed myself a brief smile before returning to Marjorie's case. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just successful, it's sustainable. And as it turns out, there's quite a market for accountability in a world designed to avoid it. The Living Archive had found a new purpose, cataloging not just what happened, but ensuring there were consequences for those who believed they could. Act with impunity, one case at a time, one client at a time, one company at a time. My last report for Eastern Atlantic wasn't really the end after all, it was just the beginning.